Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Dose. This is our webinar series. Today, I have with us Dr. Paul Hrkal and Cameron Cogswell, and this session is going to be all about micronutrient status and how the nutrient balance at the cellular level can influence inflammation, metabolism, and long-term cardiovascular health. Even with modern diets, deficiencies are surprisingly common, and today we'll explore why that happens, and what testing options can help you better understand your own health. I'm joined by two excellent speakers today, Dr. Paul Hrkal, naturopathic doctor and scientific advisor, known for translating nutrition science into practical clinical insight. And with us today, we also have Cameron Cogswell. He's a nutrition educator, faculty member at the Institute of Holistic Nutrition, founder of My Vitamin Score, and author of Cellular Nutrition, Reclaiming the Original Architecture of Health. I'll be moderating today, so please feel free to submit any questions. I'll be in chat with everyone else, kind of asking questions myself. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to you, Dr. Paul Hrkal and Cameron. Thanks again.
Appreciate it, Calvin. Cameron, thanks for joining me. We are going to be talking about nutrients today, and we have a lot to get through. But as usual on this Unfiltered Dose episode here, we are going to kind of try to do a little bit of a combination between a webinar style, give everybody that's here some good information, but then also have it a bit more conversational and an opportunity to ask questions. So let's dive right in here. So I'm going to start off by kind of asking questions maybe that you have yourself. You know, these are questions my patients ask me. Do I need to take supplements? Which ones should I be choosing? Are they safe? How do I know what the right dose is? How long do I have to take them for? Are there tests that we can measure these levels? How do we know that they're working? So we're hoping to answer all of these questions. Now, we know there's lots of different natural health products out there, but unfortunately, we don't have time to go through every single one. So we're going to try to give you, first starting off with kind of the big picture concept. So I'm going to turn it over to Cam here, who's going to kind of dive in to really create a case on why we should be thinking about nutrients as the pillar of our health.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Paul. I was looking forward to this. You know, nutrients have become, aside from my wife, you know, the love of my life. And I started on this journey over 20 years ago. And I was fortunate enough to just meet some of the, experts in the field, Dr. David Rowland, Dr. Joseph Pizzorno, who you know, of course, and he wrote the Encyclopedia of Natural Medicine, who, you know, everybody has a copy of that and every health food store does as well. But I think when it comes to me in sort of in clinic and through my research and when working with these experts, it's really, you know, come to my attention that most people understand that they need nutrients. They understand that, hey, I should get enough vitamin C, I should eat well, but they don't really understand the biochemical, function of underpinning the physiology and what these nutrients really do at the cellular level. Why do we need them? What exactly happens when we don't get enough? Most people think of frank depletionary diseases like scurvy and beriberi and pellagra, but it's really more subtle and insidious than that. What happens if I'm just not getting just enough? What happens if I need 2,000 milligrams of a nutrient and I only get 1,500? What actually happens at the cellular level? What happens to my health? What can I do to prevent that? And how would I know? So I think when we think about health and nutrition, it's really opposite sides of the same coin. They're not two distinctive fields, but really one and the same. And like I said, two opposite sides of the same coin. What I mean by that is that one, health and nutrition, it describes the presence of what the body requires, and the other describes the consequences of their absence. So that's what I mean by that. And that means to me that illness, disease, any kind of dysfunction on the cellular level arises from cells. It must begin there. And it must begin when they're not functioning the way that they're supposed to. So every single thought you have, not just who you are, as a physical being, but your thoughts, your emotions, your moods, how you perceive light, how you're listening to this, webinar right now, is the function of cells at work. We are entirely cells. And most people don't think of it that way. They think, okay, I'm a being, I'm a person, and I have cells. But the truth is that you are entirely made of cells. There's over 200 different types, and some that you wouldn't even ever think of. Some, like hair cells and skin cells. Of course, those are more common. But look on the screen there. We have podocytes, which work, inside the kidney to help filter the blood, Kupfer cells in the liver, all these kinds of cells that help the body function. Every single experience in your life is the result of cells functioning, or in some cases, not functioning. So in this sense, and through this lens, health isn't really, a failure, catastrophic failure. It always begins at the cellular level. And I tell people, there's only two ways in which cells can become dysfunctional. Either they're not getting enough of what they require, which is nutrients, or they're getting too much of what they don't require, which we can just, in this case, call poison or chemicals or, anything like that that's contaminating the cell. We can go on to the next slide there. I like this. I have someone moving the slides for me. This is awesome. So what do nutrients do? Well, they're required by every single cell in the body. And I think this is another misconception that people have. It's like, calcium is for bones, iron is for blood, B vitamins are for energy. And truly, every single cell in the body, all the 220 different types, all require the full nutritional chain of life. That means they require all of the 31 essential nutrients. Now, like in the picture we saw on the last slide, there's different functions to cells. They have different sizes, different shapes. They do different things, different enzyme systems, but they all require all of the nutrients, maybe just in different ratios. So their main purpose is to activate enzymes. This is how things happen in the body. And it's interesting that we didn't even realize some minerals, for example, molybdenum, selenium, weren't even discovered until we found them inside enzyme systems. And that's how we knew they're essential, because without them, this enzyme can't function. That process won't proceed. Some function of the body starts to degrade slowly over time. And I think if we go back to cells, sort of to sum this up, I think a nice way to look at it is if we look back to like the 19th century, there was something that came about called cell theory. What it tells us is that no matter who you are, animal, plant, person, all living things are made of cells. Cells are the basic unit of life. So nothing can be smaller than that that's living. And all cells come from pre-existing cells. So if nutrients are what allow those cells to live, to function, to carry out their specialized functions, then we require nutrients. And if we don't have them, that's where we see the slow degradation of cells. And if we have cells that start to degrade, then we have tissues that degrade. And from tissues, we have organs that degrade. And from organs, we have systems that degrade. But it all starts in the cell.
Yeah. Just a quick comment here. I like the way that this slide breaks down, the four main building blocks: vitamins, activate enzymes, minerals, stabilize reactions. So each one of these kind of building blocks has a particular area of the body that they work. And this isn't just unique to one type of cell. This is required for every single cell, like Cam said. So amino acids are required by every cell, and they help support structure, because proteins are basically chains of amino acids. They're strings. So it's a good conceptual thing, Cam, that you're bringing up here, where we think about, okay, we're going to talk about omega-3s in a lot more detail before the end of this little conversation. And it's good to think about them as playing a key role in the way that we communicate between cells, because that's the membranes. Those are the outside components. Yeah. So I like that you showcase this here.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting too, is that most people view nutrients through the lens of like, what will it do for me? What therapeutic benefit can I get from this nutrient? And really deeper than that is the understanding that they are the reason that our body functions at all. They're not for therapy. They're not drugs. They're really the reason that we can fulfill any function, like I said, that goes from daydreaming to seeing to listening, all of them done powered by nutrients inside of cells. And this is a really nice diagram that kind of exposes that reality, because this could be any cell. This could be a bone cell. This could be a hair cell. This could be anything in your body. And they all require the same nutrients just to keep themselves alive. Once they're alive, then they can carry out their specialized functions, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's really the deep down meaning that I think people need to understand, is that, okay, I require them for every single process in the body. Now, when I'm looking to play the game of, which nutrient should I take for what therapeutic benefit, it really goes deeper than that. It's like, let me make sure that my cells are living. Then they can carry out the functions, and then I won't have dysfunction in the first place. Now, that's not necessarily an easy task, but that's really what underpins all of health.
For sure. I mean, if you look at this list, we could spend 3 hours talking about each one of these areas and some of the cofactors that are listed here. I think it goes without saying that ideally your nutrition, the diet that you eat, the food that you consume, what you drink is going to give you all of these things. But if you're wondering, is my diet enough? We're going to get to that before the end of the presentation. So there are certain situations where it may not be. And I think this is kind of what we're going to be dealing here with frank deficiency and insufficiency, right, Cameron?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Most people, and I mean, this is done through, how nutrients were even first introduced to the world, right? Medicine treats things. So looking through that lens, I mean, it's not hard to understand why people think the same thing about nutrients. And they look at it because at the time nutrients were discovered and being brought into medicine and into the world, we were dealing with things like scurvy and beriberi and pellagra and rickets, which are depletionary diseases. We have almost completely annihilated our full, reservoir of nutrients in that one particular nutrient. And I say scurvy, we're talking about vitamin C depletion, but that's rarely seen these days. I mean, you'd have to, in some third world countries and underdeveloped nations, we still see some of this stuff. But when we talk about insufficiency, that's really where most people live. This is why most healthy people say, well, I'm healthy and I eat well, I do everything right, but I still feel something. I still feel tired. I still have that fatigue or little annoyances, as I would call them, that are vague complaints that aren't worthy of being labeled or diagnosed as a disease and may often even be dismissed in the medical world. That's sort of normal. But that's sort of where we all live, where it's like, I need this much of a particular nutrient and I'm getting this much. So it's not enough to fulfill all of the functions, but it's also not enough to be called a depletionary disease or to, I suppose, requires like medical attention. Is that you're sort of borderline, and some of those enzyme systems that we know nutrients now help function. If we're not supplying enough, what's going to happen? Well, some of those are going to collapse. I think Dr. Paul's he's left us, everybody, but no, we can, what happens when we have insufficiency rather than that frank deficiency is the body compensates. There are always innate compensatory mechanisms. And this is what the body is, isn't it? It's an adaptive system. We do one thing, it changes, it adapts to our lifestyle all the time. And I think one of the coolest things that I ever learned with nutrients, and I try to pass this on to everyone, is what's called nutrient triage. So exactly like I just said, if I require a given amount of a vitamin and I get just a little bit less, maybe a lot less, but not enough, again, to be totally depleted or, to be called a depletionary disease or a frank deficiency, but I'm just not getting enough. What happens? Well, the body says, okay, I need to protect myself. Just like in the case of frostbite, what happens? The body says, I'm going to protect my crucial and critical vital organs. I'm going to shut blood and oxygen away from the extremities because I can do without my fingers. It might not be the greatest thing, but I can live without my fingers, my ears, my toes. So it diverts blood. Well, the body does the same thing with nutrients. It diverts nutrients away from the less critical processes. So on the screen here, you can see this is vitamin C, and it does more than these 6 functions. But on the left, you'll see there's a ton of vitamin C molecules. We are sufficient. We have enough. Everything that depends on vitamin C will be fulfilled. But maybe I have an increased demand. Maybe I'm not getting enough through my diet. What happens? Well, the body says, I'm going to protect what's critical. What's not critical? Well, collagen production isn't as critical as, say, antioxidant synthesis, which needs to protect our DNA. Or maybe it's not as critical as white blood cell formation to protect us in our immune system. And the same thing with norepinephrine synthesis. So what it does is it shunts the vitamin C, it triaged it to the more critical pathways. And that's how we see symptoms appear in vitamin C, like, hey, you'll get, broken blood vessels, nosebleeds, you'll get bleeding gums and things like that, easy bruising, because collagen synthesis is given away, is like taken at the expense of the more critical pathways. So it's a really interesting concept that I think most people aren't aware of, but really shows you, okay, so that's what's happening. That's why I get some small kind of annoying symptoms, but I'm not at the depletionary stage of scurvy.
Yeah, I love this concept. I actually have not used this nutrient triage, but I think I'm going to going forward. So thanks for sharing this, Cam. This is just so helpful for people to understand the difference between, well, this is definitely relevant in deficiency, but it's the insufficiency that in some cases may be making things worse. So like just on a clinical level, because I'm a clinician, I see patients, you mentioned collagen production. So you're going to get more decrease in integrity of your skin and easier bruising. But stress levels, norepinephrine synthesis. We talk about adrenal function. We talk about energy levels and mood and focus. Well, that's what your catecholamines and your norepinephrine is one of your main energetic and stimulatory neurotransmitters. And if you don't have enough vitamin C in your body because it's being pushed and prioritized to making sure you have red blood cell formation and antioxidant function, you're going to miss out on some of these other really key essential things. So I think it's good just to kind of conclude talking a little bit about nutrient insufficiency. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about actual, like, what are some things that we might be dealing with in our own bodies that might tell us we are low in this.
Yeah, you get all the juicy stuff. I'll finish off here. There's two really compounding reasons, and sometimes the former accelerates the latter. But are we insufficient? You touched on that right at the beginning, Dr. Paul. Is like, are we insufficient? I would say, think about it logically. We have over 30 trillion cells which comprise our body. All of them require a continuous flow of nutrients. So imagine, this is the way I put it to people. Imagine you have an army of 30 trillion soldiers and you're sending them food rations, and they all have different requirements. One's vegan, one's, whatever it might be. This is our cells. They all require all the nutrients, but in different ratios, right, for their specialized functions. So imagine trying to ration food to 30 trillion people and getting it right every single day, day after day, and then they might even change their needs, right? A bone cell, if you break your bone, a bone cell might require a bit more nutrients, wouldn't it? So to adjust for that is almost impossible. So to supply every single cell with the precise dose of nutrients continuously from the beginning of your life to the end of your life, I would say is almost a biochemical impossibility. But not to worry. That's why we have supplements to, give ourselves more than the diet can. But then the diet is the other aspect of it, isn't it? Modern food processing, packaging, constant reheating is depleting nutrients, and vitamins are fragile yet essential. So they're usually the first consequence of this modern day convenience.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into this slide where, what it's showing is, answering that question, how do I know I need to supplement? One of them, as you just pointed out, is a very practical reason. So we just talked about how, we need more of it in certain cases, but there are some specific situations where you actually get straight up depletions. So certain pharmaceutical medications, I'll show you a slide in a second, certain signs, symptoms, deficiencies that happen at certain periods of a person's life. There's an increased need, for example, during pregnancy for things like folic acid and DHA, which is the component of omega-3s. And sometimes we, maybe through our own decisions and maybe through no fault of our own, we go through injuries, illness recoveries, specific diets. I had a patient this morning that this patient, 29-year-old female, went through stages of anxiety in her teenage years and had a binge eating disorder and went through periods of anorexia. And those types of things, even though they might have happened in the past, can absolutely deplete nutrients and vitamins. So there are things that increase the need for nutrients. And sometimes this is over and above what our diet can actually provide. One of the big things that skeptics always point out is, I don't really believe in deficiencies. I get everything through my diet. I've heard this a lot when I do presentations all over Canada. The reality is the research kind of shows this is not the case. And less than a third of Canadians aged 12 and older report that they ate the recommended number of servings of fruits and vegetables. There are many nutrients that are only found in fruits and vegetables. There are many that are only found in certain animal meats. That's why vegetarians and vegans have to be more conscious of, let's say, B vitamins and iron deficiencies. And the other thing is that foods have a much lower nutrient level than they have in the past. There's research being published every single year, detailing the fact that on paper, this is what a particular strawberry has in it. But over time, especially as we now start living in a supermarket culture where we can get everything on demand, we have things grown and harvested in unripe conditions, and then using things like ethylene gas to ripen bananas, for example, where they're not getting the right nutrients through the proper ripening process. That's why when you go to a tropical country and you eat fruit, you're like, wow, this actually tastes real. Where the fruit that you might have here in the grocery store looks like it, feels like it, but definitely doesn't taste like it. And so just think about that for a second. What's that actually doing to the nutrient levels? Do you have any thoughts on this, Cam?
I love the first part, and it reminds me of a study that I read and not too long ago. And when they tested people, because we have this different self-perception. And I see this with my clients as well. You have different ends of the spectrum, and maybe the people listening, you can kind of figure out where you are in the spectrum. There are people who say, I'm perfect. I got it all. I'm not missing anything. And then the other people who look and say, no, I'm probably this, and this is a problem. They're always over worried. They did a study. It was really interesting where they asked people to rate all their nutrients, and including like fiber and things like that. And like, do you think you're meeting your needs? Yes, no. And they gave them all the nutrients. And over 80% of people said, yes, I believe I'm meeting my needs for, ABC, whatever it was. And then they looked at their nutrient profile, and 98% of those people were not meeting their needs. So only 2% were meeting when 80% thought they were. And I mean, what a discrepancy. It's nice to be optimistic and think, hey, I'm eating a good diet. I'm eating well. But if that's not the reality, then we have to face reality. We have to say, okay, well, what can I do about this? Is it, like we said, that the food itself is not supplying them? Therefore, do I need supplementation? Or is it the fact that maybe I'm disillusioned and my diet really isn't what I think it is, and I need to change my diet? Either way, there are practical steps that you can do, but it's very interesting to see people's perceptions of their nutrient levels.
Yeah, what you can see on this slide here is an actual published survey done here in Canada in 2021, looking at the prevalence of inadequate intakes for nutrients based on the estimated average requirement for males on the blue and then females in the green. And you can see here across the board, and these are different, all the different bars are different ages, that there are some really obvious deficiencies, especially here in Canada. Vitamin D. Over 90% of people in Canada do not get enough vitamin D. And you can get a little bit through diet, but majority of it's through sunshine. So that kind of reflects a sunshine deficiency. And you can, again, many different things from calcium, especially as a person gets older, requirements are not being met. Vitamin C, vitamin A, B6, zinc, magnesium is a really common one, over 50%. I've known this from my clinical practice. 50% of people, both male and female, are not getting enough magnesium through their diet. The main sources of magnesium are pumpkin seeds and dark green leafy vegetables. And most people are not getting enough of those. Yes, we know that these are good, healthy things, but we just don't eat them frequently enough, or the foods that we eat are not rich enough in them. So go ahead, Ken.
Sorry, I was going to say, what's really, if you can go back to that, the stats, I looked at these really in depth, and not this one, but the American version as well, which mirrors in many ways Canadians as well, and the dietary habits and cultural, way that we look at diet. It's interesting, Dr. Paul, that they look at the EAR. This is the estimated average requirement. What the heck is that? Well, when I dove deep into what that is, it's almost hard to understand what the stats mean, because the estimated average requirement is not the RDA.
Yeah.
Although I would still consider the RDA low, but for argument's sake, the estimated average requirement is the level at which 50% of healthy people would get enough. So what does that actually mean? It means that these levels, if you're under those, that is the cutoff for half of healthy people not even getting enough. So this is below the RDA. So it's like the RDA is here, and they're saying most people aren't even meeting the EAR. So it's really important when you look at these things too. If anyone's looking at this like through a public lens and saying, okay, actually this isn't too, this looks bad, but how bad is it really? It's really bad. If this amount of people aren't even meeting the EAR, which is less than the RDA, we're in trouble.
No, that's a really good point. Basically, in summary, the bar that these studies even look at, set by these kind of governmental EARs and RDAs, is so low that even majority of people on a lot of these nutrients are not even meeting this super low bar. And that's not even to say, and that's why we started talking about the differences between deficiencies and insufficiencies. That's not even to say that, you know, you may have enough for your particular state in life or a particular health condition. Like, you know, we'll talk about that in a couple slides. I mean, these are some of the most common nutrient deficiencies, and they're depleted by a lot of different things as well. So that's not only are you not getting it in diet, but there are specific things that, as I already mentioned, certain types of diets, eating a highly processed diet. There's this term called ultra processed foods, Cam, that really is the big thing that scientists are looking at. And these are foods that are rich in a lot of sugars, fats, preservatives, certain types of fats that allow it to last very long on the shelf, but also have a detrimental long-term effect on your cellular membranes. And that's gonna cause a deficiency because these foods don't have a lot of nutrients. They're high in calories and low in actual nutritional value. Here's a quick little cheat sheet. So maybe take a quick screenshot here if you want. Pull out your phone, take a pic of the most common medications and the nutrient depletions. But nowadays in the world of ChatGPT, you can absolutely put your medications in and get a good list. Your pharmacist is also a fantastic resource. Look online. A lot of nutrient depletions. First of all, every drug causes nutrient depletions, but there's the kind of a usual suspects: B vitamins, magnesium, maybe zinc. I've seen that a bunch of times, but those two main categories are really, really common.
Yeah. And, you know, Paul, if I can just say too, you know, when you were just talking about like the highly processed food, I think, you know, a lot of people ask me that question, like, what is good food? And I mean, maybe we're going to get to that in a little bit too, but I think a way to look at these highly processed foods is we have to understand what is the currency of nourishment? What is the transaction of nourishment? It is cells feeding cells. I always bring it back to that level. And that's why we started the presentation talking about that, because we are cells. And that means nutrients as well must be delivered from cells. We eat plant cells, we eat animal cells, we get the nourishment. When you look at these things and they're made in a lab and they're made of chemicals, there's no cellular structure, which means they don't hold nutrients. So I always give the example of, you know, like a bag of Doritos. What cells are in Doritos? What life is in Doritos? And there is none. So that's why you can leave Doritos out for a year and mold will never grow. Well, what's mold? It is life as well. So it can't even sustain itself. And that's really the easy way to look at it. Is this made of cells? Did this come from life? That's what will sustain you. And if it comes from chemicals, then it just won't.
Right. So you might be asking, okay, so, all right, fine. You guys convinced me that deficiencies are more common. Insufficiency is probably even more common than that. How do I know it's me? So there's a couple of ways. One of them is, if any of the things that we talked about, those conditions, maybe past experiences, injuries, situations, surgeries, medications, if any of those are something that you resonate with or you've done in the past, definitely have to look at those particular issues. But there's some signs and symptoms. This is a very practical, clinical way of deciding or determining if you have issues. It's not foolproof, but it kind of gives you some clues. So we've already mentioned easy bruising. This is really common with iron deficiency, but also could be vitamin C. Certain muscle twitches, restless legs. This could be iron, it could be magnesium, could also be calcium. And so sometimes supplementing with these can correct some of these symptoms, but it also tells us this is something that actually the body in general needs more. So while your leg muscles and your leg nerves are now balanced, all your other tissues are also benefiting from having adequate levels of iron and magnesium when you start supplementing. One that I think is really applicable to a lot of people because it's kind of the junction of cosmetic function and cosmetic appearance is hair health, as well as for good physiology. And so zinc, biotin, which is B7, and iron are really common. There are other reasons as well, but just for the sake of the conversation around nutrients, these are three to be thinking about. And I'll let you take a quick screenshot of this because I'm not going to go over each one. If you have any of these symptoms, definitely speak to your healthcare provider about thinking about testing some of these. And that's kind of what we're going to be looking at here next. Do you want to add anything to the signs and symptoms that I might have missed?
Well, yeah, this is totally my wheelhouse. These are the body's first and most foundational way of telling us that something's wrong. The issue is that we've been trained to silence them. And we're going to go into blood testing. There's certainly value in any type of test. If you can get information about yourself and your health, do it. That's my best advice. But the body tells you what's happening. It's a little indicator that, hey, something's not quite right. And you have to trust yourself. You have to trust your gut. And many times people will go to the doctor and say, hey, something's up. I don't feel quite right. Something's off. And they'll run a blood test. It'll come back okay. And then what will that mean? It means that we're going to normalize those symptoms. We're going to say, well, if my blood test is okay, then maybe this is normal, or maybe I shouldn't complain, or maybe I shouldn't get this addressed, right? And I think that's a disservice to people. So what I would say with insufficiency is that, again, like we talked about at the beginning, we're in between that stage. We're not depleted. We don't have frank deficiency. It can't really be diagnosed, but something's not right. Some enzyme pathway is going to suffer a little bit. A small dysfunction will play out in subtle ways in the body. Trust yourself on that. Well, I would say that multiple factors can contribute to the strain of insufficiency. Nutrients hold a unique and foundational position, don't they? We require them. So every single compensatory system in the body relies on these nutrients. So you have to trust yourself. If you do have little symptoms, then yes, something's lacking somewhere. And why not start with what's required?
Right. Great point. Okay, so there are some objective ways that we can do this. So signs and symptoms are subjective. Now we can look at objective things. Blood testing that's available here in Canada, vitamin D, B12, folic acid, iron, vitamin A, B6, calcium, magnesium, potassium, all can be tested in blood to a reasonable degree of accuracy. And this is something that your family doctor can help you with, maybe also your nurse practitioner. The reality is a lot of times this is not tested. And this is just my experience. If a person presents with fatigue, definitely I think B12 and folic acid and ferritin, which is the marker of iron storage, is tested. But on general standard blood work, a lot of doctors will just run cholesterol. They'll run some basic red blood cell markers, but they actually don't really check for nutrients. The number one biggest nutrient deficiency in Canada, we already talked about, is vitamin D. And it's not run. It's not covered by OHIP, and people have to ask for it. It's about $40 to get tested if your family doctor sends you for it. And then you're going to know if your levels are adequate. It also is helpful for seeing if your supplementation strategy is actually working. We'll talk about vitamin D towards the end if we have time. A lot of times when I talk to doctors, in my clinic, I have clinicians from different hospitals come rotate through our pain and wellness center as part of their education. And I ask them, do you do vitamin D testing? And the answer usually I get is, well, not really, because isn't everyone just deficient? And I say, yes, I agree. The research shows that it is. But what if your patient is taking 1,000 international units? Is that really doing anything? How do I know if I ask them to take 2,000 international units that their levels are actually even changing? So I do think there's a lot of benefit to testing. And you sometimes have to push your healthcare provider to do it. There are some other markers. These are also available on blood work. They're definitely not standard. And this is something that a good naturopathic doctor can help guide you in. I'm not going to talk too much detail other than the fact that magnesium, as an example, standard magnesium in the blood, only 2% or less is actually there. You have to look what's inside the cell, and that's what the red blood cell or RBC magnesium is. So that's just one example of you can actually improve on the accuracy of some of the testing. Here's an example from one of my patients. You can see here B12 levels. They were at 171, and the range here in Canada is more than 133. Now, it's interesting. If we lived in Japan, their range for adequate levels of blood B12 is 500. They're normal here. They are deficient in Japan. Why is that? Well, that's because the Japanese medical establishment has determined that the level of deficiency and adequacy are very different. And the research shows, in fact, that you should have levels of B12 in your blood at least over 350. This is the perfect example, Cam, of nutrient deficiency versus insufficiency.
Yep.
And a lot of people are walking around with insufficient levels of B12, but their labs show that they're in normal range.
Yeah,
This
this
is
this
really
is yeah. Sorry, Dr. Paul. This is very interesting because it goes right along with the what you're saying about Japan. There's a study because we know that B12 is likely related to Alzheimer's, dementia, neurological function. And again, these insufficiencies are slow moving. I already saw a question in the chat from, I think it was Sarah, and we'll address that. These things are slow moving, uncompounding. It's almost highly unlikely that we ever see someone just has scurvy. Hey, every nutrient I'm taking in is perfect except for one. It's so unlikely. They're compounding, they're slow moving, and they're subtle. But something like vitamin B12, there was a study done with people with dementia, Alzheimer's, and 83% of them had normal B12 in their blood, but 0 in their cerebral spinal fluid. So there are limitations to this. Again, different countries look at it different ways, and I think that's probably a fallback, Paul. That Japanese how they do their markers and parameters is really because we know that in blood is not what's representative of what's in our cells or in our tissues.
Absolutely. Okay, there are some specialty tests. So over and above things you can get on blood testing, this is really specific to your healthcare provider, specifically your naturopathic doctor or nutritionist, people and clinicians that have expertise. I like to use the word, are the clinicians that you're working with, are they nutrient do they have nutrient literacy? Are they nutrient literate? Are they diet literate? Are they supplement literate? Because a lot of times, you talk to your family doctor and then they really don't really know how to guide you in this because they really haven't received the training. Not that they don't believe in it, they just really may not actually know about it. And there's some additional testing. We'll talk a little bit about the omega score. That's the type of test to actually look at omega-3 levels. I think it's majorly underused because of how important omega-3s are. But there's other testing like microbiome testing that might look at, do you have an imbalance in your bacteria, in your gut? But this is some examples. This is a hair mineral analysis I did on a patient. These are some examples of specialty testing that go above and beyond. So if you identified that nutrients could be an issue, if you have some risk factors we talked about earlier, and you've identified this as a problem, we can definitely go in and look at some of these on blood work, but you may need some additional specialty testing in some areas. And so this particular patient was quite low in magnesium, and hair calcium. And that tells me that overall we need to up those levels because hair, as an example, is a storage form. It's a tissue where minerals are deposited. Can't really test vitamins here. Vitamins are going to be more tested in blood, or maybe you can look at certain urinary marker metabolites. Just finishing off this section, talking about some specific health conditions. So just really quickly, if you have gut issues, you're going to have issues with absorption of all of your nutrients. But there's a couple that really we should point out. You can see in both celiac disease, and this even might apply to non-celiac gluten sensitive patients. So that's a much higher percentage of people, where less than 1% of the population has celiac disease. Up to 10% of the population could have what's called non-celiac wheat or gluten sensitivity. So you have a lot of similar symptoms, maybe not as severe. Usually it's not extreme diarrhea, but you definitely could have adverse effects from consuming gluten in this case. And you're not going to be absorbing B vitamins and iron very well. This is repeatedly coming up as a problem with patients. They keep taking iron and they're not getting better. Any sort of inflammatory bowel issues, Crohn's, colitis, if you've had a bowel resection, if you had any sort of weight loss procedure, like a gastric bypass, even those clinics are specially designed to be testing for those types of deficiencies because they're so common. Osteoporosis, high blood pressure, and menopause. And I just wanted to bring up menopause because I know a lot of patients I deal with are in this particular phase of their life. We're really thinking about multiple areas here, not just one. It's not just the lack of hormones, but it's the effect that those hormones have on different tissues like bone health. So we know that at this time of their lives, women need more vitamin D, calcium, and vitamin K that support bone health. And similarly for cardiovascular function, We know that estrogen has a protective role in bone and heart function, and blood vessel function also has a protective role on muscle function. So there's an increased need for things like creatine and vitamin C, collagen. These are all things that are found in your diet. And because of the protective effect of your hormones, you could maybe get away with less. But if you've lost that protective effect, now that's a bigger issue. Is there any other condition, Cam, that you want to mention here or add to any of this?
No, because sometimes it's not really these big conditions that we see. You mentioned earlier, like pregnancy, a time when you're teenagers, any growth spurts, things like that. Sometimes it's the unexpected things, which I see in my clinic more often than not. It's not that someone has this diagnosable disease and then we look, it's like, hey, oh my gosh, I was just sick for a little while. I just gave birth. I just went through a stressful event. I was laid off my job. Someone passed away in my family. All of these things that adds everyday stress that we don't even think about nutrients or think about diet when it's related to that. So I think sometimes the best thing to look at is not what's frank and in front of us, but the everyday things that, again, we've been taught to normalize that really degrade the nutrient levels in the body. And I talked earlier about, I suppose I would call it like nutrient imposters, fake foods without cells. Your body, again, every cell requires nutrients for every single function. This includes digestion, assimilation of food itself. And let me tell you a quick story, and maybe this will bring it to light for some people. In the 1980s, there's this humanitarian effort done by UNICEF down in places like Nigeria and Malawi, down in Africa, where people were suffering from hrkal. Okay, this is a severe protein deficiency.
Severe, yeah.
So very severe. The bloated bellies, as we've all
right.
seen them, people down in Africa who weren't getting enough protein, not enough nutrition to begin with. But we've been trained to look at macronutrients. It doesn't fit my macros. Hey, did I get enough protein today? But we're never asking, did I get enough vitamin A? Did I get enough selenium? We're never asking those things. We've been trained in the wrong way. And so what happened, that UNICEF and these other charity organizations, they sent down protein in the form of, well, what was shelf stable, devoid of nutrients, so it wouldn't mold, so it wouldn't rot, so it would stay good for a long time. They gave them powdered skim milk protein. Okay. So what happened? They think, okay, we're doing something great here. We're giving them protein, but without the nutrients in there. The kids began to drink it, and within the first week or so, some of the bloated bellies came down. Like, yes, we're winning. And then some of the kids went blind, completely blind. This is in the 1980s. Never regained their vision. Why? Because there was such a stress put on their system. Their metabolism was functioning at such a low level that the tiny, tiny amounts of vitamins and minerals they had were just keeping them alive. A huge influx of protein means what? It means more demand on our cells, which means a higher requirement of nutrients. Their vitamin A stores, which were already low, went down to zero and they went blind. So it's really an oversight of nutritional science. And I think some of these things we have to consider, that everything I do requires nutrients. So if I have a more stressful day than my ordinary day, I have a higher demand for nutrients. So again, that was an extreme circumstance, but I think I try to tell my clients, like, look beyond the big disease or diagnosing yourself. What other ways might you be stressing the body that has a higher demand for nutrients?
For sure, yeah. That's an amazing anecdote and a true story that really brought to light that it's about the synergy of a lot of these nutrients. All right, maybe we'll take a quick break here for questions. We actually have like 20 plus more slides here. There's a lot more information, but you know what we'll do? I think rather than going into the details, we might save this for another session. We can come back and actually dive into some specifics. I really like that we talked about a lot of concepts here to help people understand how to test things. But maybe let's look at some of the questions here.
I saw a couple too.
Yeah. So let me pull that up. All right. So I can kind of ask you here, Cam. Let's start with Sarah. What can happen in the body when more than one nutrient is insufficient at the same time? Which nutrient insufficiency should you address first? How would you answer that?
Yeah. What can happen? What can't happen? And I never want to do a cop-out answer. I get these questions all the time, especially like when I'm teaching at the college. Everyone wants to know, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for me? And I wish I could work with every single person individually. But here's the easy answer. What should you address first? The one with the greatest deficit. That's your bottleneck. Like we just talked about, like with the vitamin A, and like Dr. Hrkal was just saying, They're synergistic. They all work together. So your bottleneck is going to be the one that has the greatest need, right? So whichever one's the lowest. I'm going to plug this in here too, just for everybody, because I know there's questions on this too. How do you test? Yes, can you do a blood test? I saw someone wrote in the comments, my doctor sent me for a vitamin D and the lab wouldn't do it. Well, this is your reality. But what's also the reality? Your doctor sent you to test one of 31 nutrients. That's 3%. And I always give the analogy, would you be okay if you only scanned 3% of your computer for viruses? Would you be okay if the pilot said, hey, we've done 3% of the safety checks, we're going to take off? No, it's not enough. You have to test all of them for that very reason, as Sarah said. They're synergistic. We have to find our bottleneck. That's what's going to unlock health in the easiest, quickest way. And it's going to be a snowball effect. So I created a test. This is with the help of Dr. David Rowland. We've been doing this for years, called My Vitamin Score. You can go to myvitaminscore.com and do a test at home. This is about participating in your health. I think removing yourself and getting your blood taken and sending it to a lab, you're not participating in your health. This is a way of looking at subclinical symptoms and saying, is it likely? Might I be suffering from insufficiency that a blood test might not pick up? And so my vitamin score is what I use with my clients. It works very well. And it's a good way to say, hey, I'm now aware of what's happening. I can feel this. I'm participating. I'm answering the questions and I'm a part of this, which is always good for your health.
Yeah, I mean, I like that adds another option. I think whenever we're looking at answering a question like, do I need more of something, Cam? It's not, to me, I just don't want to look at one value. I know that's the way we've been trained. Like every randomized control trial is like, what one variable can I look at? Well, if I'm tired, and is it iron deficiency? Well, we now know that, there's also a requirement for vitamin B2 with iron and B6, and it all helps with absorption, and not just absorption, but proper assimilation.
Vitamin A, vitamin C, copper, all of them.
All of those things are called cofactors. And so this is something as clinicians, we're very, very familiar with. So I think that if I could add my 2 cents for you here, Sarah, which nutrient deficiency should I address first? Collect as much data about that as possible. I think part of this, I think Cam gave you a great subjective option. And then there's also the objective testing. And if you don't really know which way to go with that, that's the type of question that nutrient literate clinician can help you. Maybe you don't want to spend hundreds of dollars on all the different tests, but maybe you can curate that. So I think that's probably the best way to look at it. And of course, generally speaking, you want to make sure that you have optimal macros, but if you're living in the Western world, most likely you are not macro deficient. You can definitely be suboptimal in macronutrients. We talk about how proteins and good fats for sure, but we might have to dig deeper on some of those micronutrients.
Yeah. And I'll just add on to this, and I know we're sort of on the same question, but I think this works for everybody. Is when you talked about iron, I had a client, this is just 2 weeks ago, low iron, always having little issues and feeling it. The common symptoms, subclinical deficiency. And what's the doctor's recommendation? She was getting prescribed up to 300 milligrams a day, which if you know,
constipating, there's a
it's
lot
insane.
Of,
it's insane. The idea, what I like to look at for health is like, again, I can be a participant. Let me look at this. Let me really figure out what's going on. It's fun. Okay. It's not a death sentence. What we did is not look at, okay, how can I force iron up biochemically? What's keeping iron low? That's what I want to figure out. What's keeping it from going up? Not try to force it up. We gave her vitamin A and vitamin C, which are required for iron to function. So I'm not looking at just, where is iron? I'm asking, is it functioning properly? Are the other cofactors there that need to be utilized to get iron up, to get it into the cell? So we gave her vitamin A, vitamin C within 2 weeks, already feeling better. So sometimes it's not just the big picture. It's vitamin D, it's iron. Again, like Dr. Paul was saying, it's the supporting nutrients. And it's funny because that was just 2 weeks ago. I had a very client with that exact scenario.
Yeah, for sure. Where it's more than just a one nutrient, one fix solution in some cases. All right, I'm going to go to the chat and grab a couple questions from there. Let's talk a little bit about, Karen asked a question about sleep and fatigue. Now, I think sleep and fatigue are probably really common concerns for a lot of people. We're not going to give some specific advice to Karen because obviously that's something to ask for healthcare provider. But let's just say in general, Cam, if we were to kind of have make some general comments about if a person presents with sleep issues and fatigue, what are some thoughts that you might kind of generally put forward?
Yeah, I mean, I approach everyone just like you said, and I try to do the same thing, Dr. Paul's. If I could treat every single person, it would be a wonderful world, wouldn't it? But we have to do our best, not to prescribe over the internet too, because I don't know this person. But we have biochemical individuality. We're all different. How long have you been suffering with this from? Is this an ongoing thing? Is this years and years and years you've been suffering from sleep and fatigue? Have you ever been tested for anything? What's your diet like? What's your sleep routine like? There's so many confounding factors, but I do go back to the nutrients because, again, we have to know that these are foundational. We require these. We must have these. So people always ask me, what nutrients should I take for this? And I think that's falling into the trap because I don't think nutrients work like therapeutics. I think we have to understand, just like the iron example, what else might not be supporting that plays a role. Again, that's why I use the system I use, my vitamin score, because it allows us to test for all of them and find those other little hidden things that, again, a blood test might not find, but might be hidden and say, oh my gosh, I never realized because of my unique biochemical individuality, I might have been born in a way that I have an extremely high requirement for something. And I'll go off on a little tangent, but maybe this is helpful to some people. There's something called a metabolic scar. Okay. If you've ever been sick, this can happen also in pregnancy, like we talked about earlier, when you have an environmental or lifestyle circumstance that brings your nutrients really low. Well, what does the body do? It must adapt, right? We talked about these compensatory measures. It must adapt to keep you alive. In doing so, it's going to change enzyme pathways and binding affinity. That means, and this happened just with like the kids in Africa, with vitamin A, also happen after with malaria or tuberculosis. If your nutrients are brought low for a really long time, which might be the case in extended fatigue or extended sleep trouble, that's why I asked how long, your nutrient needs reset because your enzyme systems have changed. That means you now have a higher requirement for life. And this is not that rare, where it used to be a really rare thing. Now it's actually more common. It's like, hey, I only need 500 milligrams of vitamin C. Then I had tuberculosis. Now I need 2,000 for the rest of my life. Enzyme systems reset to help you adapt, but at the end, they cause an extremely high requirement. So that might not answer the sleep or fatigue question, but sometimes I get these cases where it's like, I've been taking all the right things and my sleep still isn't good. You may have an extended requirement. I can't say that for sure with this individual, but it's certainly an interesting concept.
That is a very interesting thing for people to consider. And a lot of times, again, we think that the absence of main symptoms, it means that there isn't some sort of disease or some sort of process that isn't happening underneath. There's a really important thing. We as humans, we kind of want to go back to our normal, and our normal is usually defined in our kind of like early period of our lives where, we felt like we could do whatever we wanted. But anyone that's over 40 and definitely over 50 and 60 realize that as a person gets older, you accumulate different things. We learned this a lot through COVID, where people had a viral infection and it was nothing more than a flu for them, and others had some very strong symptoms. And you actually can have something like post-COVID syndrome. And so why is one person going to this long-term chronic health issue where another person, they bounce back easily, and they may have some additional needs after that to handle it? So these are examples of all these types of unique properties, and it may require we need to change our nutrition levels to a higher level because of this. It could be a car accident, for example. Well, now I need to really pay attention to my inflammation a lot more. I think that's just being proactive about your health, right, Cam?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wish I could help everybody. And when they say, hey, my sleep's not good, the easy answer is what everyone's going to tell you: take some magnesium. I can't say that. I don't know you for sure, and that might not be it. And again, is there other cofactors in there? So I would say, try to test yourself. Pay attention to what you're doing. Pay attention to what you're eating. There's always subtle signs. I believe in the body. I trust my body tremendously. And if there's one day you sleep a little better, take some notes, figure out what's going on. There might be something in the diet, something you did. All of these things, your body is so adaptive and changing. You got to catch things while you can. And again, take accountability for your own health. But again, be a participant in it.
I think that, one thing that might be frustrating to people, Cam, is that, if you have chronic health issues and also multiple medications that you're on, I think this is where that signal, those signs and symptoms the body's trying to give us, it is not as clear for people.
For sure.
Sometimes if they're not sleeping well, they're foggy and they're just not able to focus, and the ability to actually be meaningfully mindful just starts to be impaired a little bit. And so that's where I hear the frustration with, you may not be able to tell why you're tired because it could be multiple factors. So I do think that the closer we get to health and we kind of peel back the layers of that onion, we are able to really use our body's signs and symptoms to a higher degree of accuracy. But I've also had a lot of patients that, for a whole bunch of different reasons and a whole bunch of different medications, they now have these signals really dulled, and they find that that's difficult.
That's really true, and again, it's not a compassion thing. I have compassion. Like I said, I wish I could help everyone. It's I would say that our health is holistic. We are holistic beings. Focus on what you have control over.
Yep.
Okay, that's the best advice. These things will snowball quickly. We can't affect positive or negative, but let's look at the positive side here. We can't impact one area of our health without impacting others. You get a better night's sleep. Guess what else improves? Your mood, your energy. You improve one thing, you make one step in the right direction, and it's compounding. And I assure you, it's the same story of the people who change something, and they come to you with a health goal. And once they accomplish a health goal, maybe it's, hey, I want to lose a little bit of weight. Once they get there, it's like, I want to run a marathon. It opens up your eyes in the world to so many different things. So yes, you may have some compounding factors, and I'm compassionate to that, and other things and medications which dull your senses. One positive change, one thing can really snowball and make some wonderful changes for you.
All right, we're going to finish up with Joan's question here. How much is too much vitamin D? And actually, I'm going to go ahead and skip through a couple things here because I do talk about vitamin D. So it's actually perfect. So we know vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. It has a whole bunch of different roles in the body. So it's not just for bone health. This is the big key takeaway. We often think of vitamin D, I want to do that to prevent osteoporosis. Each different condition, each different risk that we want to reduce actually has a slightly different minimum amount. So to optimize bone health, we actually are kind of at the lowest level. If we're dealing here with Canada, it's 75 nanomoles per milliliter. Let's see, do I have? Unfortunately, I don't have that actual little chart that I would be able to refer to, but I'll just ask people to visualize. You want about 75 nanomoles. So if you're stating you're at 114, that is more than that 75. And in my kind of ideal range in my clinical practice, I kind of like my patients above 100. There definitely is a vitamin D toxicity. There's case reports and studies, and that's at over 250 nanomoles per milliliter here in Canada. But just because you have that level doesn't mean you actually are toxic. It really comes down to calcium as well. So you want to have that tested. Anything to add, Kim?
No, it's an individual thing. And I think the numbers you shared are a great way of sort of managing that and knowing the parameters. I'll just tell you an interesting side note. This is not to say go and take a ton of vitamin D. This isn't a prescription for everyone, but there are people on both ends of the spectrum. Like I mentioned earlier in this webinar, it's like some people who say, hey, everything's fine, and they sort of ignore some of their own, health conditions, and some who are worried about every single thing. So you don't want to do too much vitamin D. You don't want to do too little. You need to find what works for you. But there are people who work in Antarctica. There's government systems set up there where they're going and they're monitoring weather and other things for the planet, and they don't see any sunlight. So do you know what they're prescribed? 50,000 IUs a day, which is tremendous. And that's done through the government and doctors, and they're giving 50,000 IUs a day. But then sometimes you'll go to your own doctor and say, 1,000's enough. It's so individual, but I think if your levels are 115, you're in a good spot. How do you feel? I think if you feel great and your blood levels are showing that, I think you're in a really good spot. I wouldn't lower it personally. I mean, maybe if you're outside in the summer, maybe you need to take a little less if you're supplementing. I don't know the context of that question. Perhaps this is all through diet and really good enzyme pathways. Thank your mom and dad for that. The genes are strong there if the enzyme pathways are filled easily. I think that person's in a really good spot.
Yeah, no, great. Okay. Just to be respectful of everybody's time, it's 1 o'clock. So thank you everybody for joining us. I don't know if Calvin's gonna, he's coming in. He's gonna wrap it all up here, but we got through a lot of great information, especially talking about some of the conceptual issues with nutrient deficiencies. We made the case of that the vitamin deficiencies, nutrient deficiencies are more common than we thought. We made the distinction between deficiencies and insufficiencies, and Cam really introduced a phenomenal concept called nutrient triage, which puts that insufficiency into context. There's a lot of things contributing to potential deficiencies. So hopefully you have a bit of a roadmap on what to do in terms of evaluating that, whether it's through signs and symptoms, whether it's through testing, working with your healthcare provider to find that personalized level. I think when we come back and do a part 2 at some point, I think we're going to talk about some specific nutrients in a lot more detail. There's a whole bunch of slides that we didn't have a chance to get to, but I thought the foundational conversation was phenomenal. So thank you so much, Cameron, for joining.
Oh yeah, thank you as well. Yeah, I love talking about this. We can have many conversations. We can go really deep and we can have a lot of fun, but thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like you just did a great job wrapping up the webinar there, Dr. Paul Hrkal. Thank you so much. And Cameron as well. Thank you for being here to chat with Paul. And also everyone in the chat, thank you guys so much. If you didn't have your question answered, no worries. You can just reply to the replay email, which we will be sending shortly. And then we hope to see you guys all on the next episode of the Unfiltered Dose. Keep an eye on your inboxes and we'll let you know when that is. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.